right, welcome folks to the last session. I'm your host, Lucian Fogoros, and I want to thank you all for sticking around. A lot of great session, but we saved the best to the last. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce a session of securing smart cities. And as we're in the face of the world shaking up Ukraine, I struggle to find words to start this session. Our thoughts and solidarity are for the people of Ukraine. And this session is interesting to me because it got both representative of government, of US government, as well as the private sector. And it's not just about securing smart cities, but cities in general, what each one can do. So without further ado, Anka, Charles, please, she'll be your moderator for today.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for attending Securing Smart Cities. We're glad to have you here. I want to remind everybody that today's event wouldn't be possible without HiveMQ, Ursuleo, Fortinet, Building Cybersecurity Organization, and Trend Micro. And I wanted to start introducing you to our panel today that will be talking about securing smart cities. I am your moderator, Anka Charles, and I am the founder and CEO of 365 Striker Cybersecurity company. And we will start with Olivera, and she is a research scientist at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement with smart cities, Olivera.
Thank you, Anka. Hi, everyone. My name is Olivera Kotevska. I'm a research scientist at Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Computer Science and Mathematics Division. My research is machine learning data algorithms for streaming applications, such as energy and biomedical fields.
Excellent, thank you, Olivera. Michael Thompson, he is the lead ICS cybersecurity engineer at MITRE. Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, my name is Michael Thompson. I recently came to MITRE. I spent, prior to that, 25 years in the industry. So I'm not purely academic. I've actually wore, fire-resistant clothes and been in the field. I spent most of my career as a process control engineer and a functional safety engineer. And then I transitioned to industrial control system cybersecurity around 2007, and been in it ever since. Recently, I was asked to help stand up smart cities here at MITRE, and I'm in the process of creating a pretty interesting lab.
Excellent, thank you, Michael. And we also have Ed Cabrera with Trend Micro. He's the Chief Cybersecurity Officer. Ed?
Yeah, no, and thank you. It's great to be here. I think we're going to have a great panel discussion today on smart cities. And so a little bit about myself. I spent 20 years in the United States Secret Service, working in and leading many different cybersecurity programs there. Before leaving, I was the Chief Information Security Officer. But a part of my time was really working on and leading different programs there that really connected to from a critical infrastructure and protection perspective. And so, but I've been at Trend Micro for 6.5 years now, and I work with and very closely with our research and development teams from a threat and vulnerability perspective, our product teams, and ultimately our customers, right? So I think this everything that we have to deal with and talk about today is that intersection, right? And so it's the technology piece, it's the human piece, and the security piece.
All right, thank you all. We will have about 55 minutes today, and if you'd like to ask questions, please use the Q&A chat to be able to submit your questions, and we'll go over those at the end. With that, we're going to jump right into it. We all know with smart cities, from a cybersecurity perspective, you have a larger and more complex attack surface. What do you guys think? What would be some of the best methods to protect against the complexity and the larger attack surface?
Well, I'll jump in. I think the first and foremost is this whole notion that if you cannot see it, you cannot protect it. So having an awareness of the different sensors, right? When we talk about smart cities, it's truly sensors. It's sensors from lighting to HVAC systems on the building automation side of the house, but on the smart city side of the house at a macro level, transportation systems, sanitation systems, all of these have sensors that you need to be able to monitor and control. So I think not having that visibility is probably one of the biggest problems and challenges that cities will have to face and are facing right now, is really understanding what they have, what sensors they have, what are the interdependencies of those systems. And it's that cascading effect of risk that if you don't touch one or protect one, you don't really know the unintended consequences down the road if a system is compromised and or disrupted.
Anko, you brought up a good point with the complexity of it, right? So you touched on that, and that's something that's very important. So I think you got to go about it in two separate fashions. So first off, it goes back to that old saying, how do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time, right? And so you have to be able to drill down. And like Ed mentioned, it's a smart city is comprised of multiple subsystems, intelligent transportation systems, electric vehicle infrastructure charging. I mean, there's a whole host of them. You have to be able to look at them at that granular level. And then also you need to be able to step back and see it more holistically where they interface as well, because the interface very well could be the area that's exploited. And so I think it comes about by like both looking at it deep and independently, as well as taking a step back and seeing the big picture. So you need to have both of those perspectives, I think, to defend these systems.
Yes, I just want to add to Michael and Ed. They brought an excellent points. So smart city is this big concept, the umbrella of many subsystems that exist within individually, but also with opportunity they to interact in some way. So it's quite complex system to synchronize, to establish secure communication, and how each of them can complement each other in a way to achieve like this global goal of making the city smarter.
I always like these kind of things. When we start talking, I always like to give the audience something they can go do, right? And so looking to secure one of these, good place to start is by looking at take your individual system that you're trying to secure and create a profile. So you can look to the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they've got a cybersecurity framework that kind of details step by step how you can go about doing this. And I would say, take a look at that and start with a profile on the specific thing that you're trying to protect, and put them together.
Yeah, no, I think everything has been that we've mentioned is incredibly important, and I'm a big fan of the NIST cybersecurity framework. I think even further is to really truly to achieve resilience, right? So I mean, I think smart cities like organizations, resilience is the key, and I think you really have to understand intimately the threats that you face, but also the vulnerabilities that you have, right? So when it comes to the threat aspect to it, I think the world has changed significantly in the last 5 years, not just from the Ukraine perspective and what we're dealing with now, but I think ultimately from a cyber criminal perspective, what has really put critical infrastructure and smart cities at risk is this notion that cyber criminals can now monetize attacks on critical infrastructure. Right. Oftentimes we think about these systems as, well, why would they want to, other than the beating their chest saying that they can do something and compromise a certain system, a traffic light system, a sanitation system, you name it, from a smart city perspective. But now, being it from a ransomware or digital extortion perspective, that creates a whole different dynamic. Now these systems and critical infrastructure owners and operators really had security through obscurity. Now they have to really understand that they are a target, and we've seen it, right? It's been all over the internet. You can't, talk about ransomware without talking about municipalities and or other critical infrastructure systems being targeted and attacked. So I think that's where the smart city piece now is, elevates that discussion on the threat piece. So really understanding the threats, right? But then there's obviously, as we mentioned earlier, is understanding what assets and systems and sensors that you have, but also understand the vulnerabilities that you have associated with those systems. So constant version control, constant patching, constant vigilance is critical for these cities as they go forward.
Ed, you brought up something that just got my wheels spinning here. So what you hit on this, you talked about security by obscurity, right? And so that's what my industry for years did, right? So in the industrial control system, cybersecurity space specifically, you know, in the beginning, we were more like, who would attack a gas plant, right? And as we all know, there are people that are very interested in that. What I'm getting at with this is that Smart Cities has a great representative model in what we've done in the industrial control system cybersecurity space. A lot of the systems share some of that technology. And when we start to look at smart cities and securing them, we've got a good go by with what we've done so far in industrial control system cybersecurity. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to explore that as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. So how do we take security and make it part of the design for smart cities? What are your thoughts on that?
All security. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think security now, just now, as we talk about it on the enterprise side, it's this whole concept and this growing adoption of DevSecOps or DevOps, where we're talking about applications being developed in a agile form, but also providing and including your testers, your operators, your security providers into that development sprint phase, right? For each of these applications that they're developing. And so obviously now, what we need to talk about from a smart city perspective is not only the applications and systems being developed that we need to bake in security, but also now from a procurement perspective, understanding the systems that are being provided. We had a great conversation leading up to our panel today, and we talked about the certain different things of where is security at the product level, is it at the network level, where is security, where security should be, and it's like all the above. And so when we're talking about looking at how do we change that, the paradigm is really from the beginning, right? It has to be baked in, has to be looked at, and from that perspective. And so when we're looking at security architecture, it has to be, you have to look at the security requirements and the security capabilities of each system and or product and or sensor that you're bringing online. Has to be paramount when you're developing and deploying smart city systems.
Thank you, Ed. Michael?
Yes.
Or Olivera, go ahead.
Yeah, something I want to mention, really, like, I'm really fan of this, and I'm apologize if like I mentioned in some other like occasion, so it will appear like I'm repeating, but I attended this talk by Vint Cerf. We know, right? He's one of the creators of the internet, and the talk was actually at NIST that Michael referred earlier. And he said when they were creating the internet, they were so excited, they just wanted to make that work. But now, since we have that experience with the IoT, which is like the crucial integral part of smart cities, we can learn those lessons, and we can think of security from the scratch. Like when we design the system, as you mentioned, and when we deploy the applications and the devices. So not just to be happy that something works, but okay, we know we're gonna make that work, but what are the maybe at least the basic security and privacy that we can include since the design, like since the beginning of the system design and applications.
No, that is, you're dead on. I mean, just to pile on to that, what you guys are saying about security being baked in as opposed to bolted on, I can't stress enough how important that is. So having that as a fundamental basis for your engineering design is critically important. You know, for years, just like she just said, we were more concerned about just making it work. Like even at chemical plants and refineries and such, it was more of a focus to make it reliable, to make it safe, right? As opposed to cybersecurity, it was not even an afterthought back in a few years ago. But you know, one of the crucial elements that came from that is the understanding that safety and cybersecurity are at this point inextricably linked. The system can't be safe unless it is also secure. If someone can go in and tamper with it, and I mean, let's face it, a lot of these IIoT systems, they change the physical world, right? They have impacts to the real world. If someone can manipulate them, well, that's no longer safe, you know?
And there's always that balance between security and usability that we also have to consider, right? A system that's 100% secure might not work, might not be able to be used. So yeah. Let's talk a little bit about machine learning and AI and how those are used in smart cities, and what are some of the pros and cons of using machine learning and AI in smart cities. And Olivera, maybe we'll start with you on this topic.
Yeah, so right now we cannot imagine the concept of smart cities to be reality without machine learning AI to be part of it. And although we are aware of the benefits of AI and machine learning, right, of detecting objects, predicting events, finding the similarities of the events, and so on, the data that we are collecting from smart cities, it's very diverse, and some of the data or most of it has a lot of sensitive information, and we give this sensitive information to the machine learning algorithms. So then we need now to think of how this sensitive information should be protected when we integrate in our machine learning models. Because what if the machine learning algorithm is hacked in some way? And that hacker can also learn, like, what was the data that we use for training? What is that we are trying to do with these machine learning models? And that can really hurt our systems and cities. So when we talk about security and privacy, if we don't include machine learning AI, that will be impossible to really provide some guarantee for the cities and the systems as a part of the smart cities. So yeah, there are multiple mechanisms, and industry and government now is trying more to push into these direction of privacy and security of machine learning. So and another thing I want to mention, so maybe it's becoming that it's not only enough now just to have the accuracy, how well the algorithm is performing, but also especially in the situation when we need to deploy the algorithm somewhere where people can access online, so it's not like it's some closed system, we need to have a testing about privacy attacks and cybersecurity, so to know how safe our machine learning models are.
You hit on something there about, of course, the AI and machine learning is going to be a critical part of this going forward. This is something we're exploring a lot at MITRE right now. We have a couple of tools out there, ARCSys, ARCSS. It's used to determine when AI or machine learning is best used for an application. So it's kind of like a way to evaluate that process to determine whether machine learning or AI would be a good fit for it. And then another one, you talked about exploiting those very machine learning and artificial intelligence models. And so we've got this thing called Dioptra. And similarly, it's used for evaluating defense and defense of these AI systems. So if anyone's interested, by all means, reach out and take a look. It's out there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, machine learning and AI has been, I mean, from a Trendmarker perspective, we've been leveraging machine learning back to 2004 when we started leveraging anti-spam models to be able to detect spam in a much faster and much more efficient way. So automation is incredibly important when we talk about everything smart cities, right? So also to smart factories and smart homes, because ultimately that control layer is cloud, but behind it is these engines that are going to be completely and utterly necessary for these systems to work properly and efficiently, right? To provide value. But at the same time, they provide value from a security perspective. So we already leverage AI and machine learning throughout our products in different parts of our at different stages, be it pre-execution, post-execution, machine learning from an endpoint perspective, but also at the network layer, and then also we're even leveraging machine learning on identifying business email compromises. So looking at the language and the natural language processing piece to be able to detect and fingerprint communications. So all that being said, it is a natural extension for smart cities. And so these models are incredibly important. But I think Oliver hit a great point. One, it's obviously security. What's the benefit, or rather the automation and performance. Security, how you can leverage AI and machine learning to be able to improve security across smart city systems. But lastly is the privacy piece too, is because these models can be influenced, and there is this inherent bias too that is problematic with machine learning unless you create some anti-biases capabilities to remove that bias from those models. And so there is this notion of, okay, with machine learning specifically, the pipeline of information is critical, right? So if this whole adage of garbage in, garbage out. So if you just don't have a good pipeline of data to be able to reference and/or baseline good behavior, so to speak, across these systems, and then what is malicious behavior, what is the anomalous behavior across these smart city systems. So all incredible. And I think it was the University of Michigan we were talking about earlier. I think they had actually even come across on transportation systems where they can actually, they proved it within a proof of concept that they can actually manipulate sensors on a vehicle to then create a false sense of traffic at intersections. Well, you can imagine what you can do with that if you're a malicious actor, right? Not just creating the sense of there's traffic or a bottleneck someplace, but also possibly rerouting emergency services away from an intersection, which could cause greater damage or problems. And so all of this is incredibly important. And I think to me, it's one of the most exciting things across the board from security and smart cities is the machine learning and AI potential here.
Excellent. Before we jump into privacy, we have a question from the audience that I think it's a good time to bring in. Who is primarily responsible in securing smart cities? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I mean, it should be written into the requirements, right? So, I mean, whatever municipality, whatever government agency is involved, they should be considering that and writing into requirements of these systems that are going in, I would say. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's everybody's responsibility.
And that's what I'm going to get at. And so there's a concept in cloud, right? It's this shared responsibility model, right? Where you have security being provided at the cloud service provider level, and then you have to have over-the-top security solutions that are able to augment the existing, security controls that these cloud service providers provide. So same thing here, smart cities, it's going to be a partnership here, right? So the cities themselves are taxed already to be able to provide the top tier security that is needed right now, to protect cities and systems. And so they're going to have to rely on partners and managed security service providers, having an intimate relationship with vendors, such as Trend Micro, whoever they have, to be able to help them from a design phase, like a reference architecture point of view, but also then into the monitoring and responding to, incidents and attacks.
Yeah, I will. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, by all means, go.
Yes, I just want also to mention like the role of government in this. Like NIST cybersecurity framework was mentioned, so maybe a little bit even the culture, or maybe the culture in kind of like a quality assurance when something is deployed to be like not only like those are the functionality that our system is offering, but we also follow this and this security guidance provided by NIST or IEEE, I don't know, other So to become more, I think, is a norm of the quality of the product will be optimal. So I think going in that direction can be helpful.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
always
Oliver,
say, go ahead.
Oliver makes a great point. I apologize. Is on the product side, right? So there's movements towards even on the just a regular IoT perspective, but broader speaking, industrial IoT at the sensor level is providing almost. I know there was some talk and an interest from NIST exploring labels, right, from manufacturing labels regarding the products that and the sensor that they're building to be able to say they have this basic level of security and configuration associated with those products. And so, yes, it goes from the product and the manufacturer of the product, but also throughout the systems integrators that are actually possibly working with municipalities to get these systems online. But then it's also working with, security partners.
You hit on a good one about the securing the components, right? So there are groups out there that, at least as it relates to operational technology, industrial control system, IIoT. So we've got the ISA Global Cyber Alliance that operates with the ISA Secure, and they're doing just that. They've got a certification process. So I think there's like companies like Exida and TUV Rhineland and TUV Sud, various certifying bodies that can look at your product and then, in accordance with IEC 62443 4-2, can tell you what level of security your product meets. Now, here's the interesting thing: is like, as most people familiar with this, we understand that they have security levels. It goes like 1, 2, 3, and 4, similar to like safety integrity level, right? And so, all the products that I've seen so far, they barely achieve, like, well, I don't want to say barely, they achieve like a security level 2, right? There's not a lot of 3s or 4s out there. So that's an interesting thing. But to your point, yeah, there are certifying bodies that are certifying. But the point that I wanted to get at is that problem that we've seen in safety is also applicable to security. And so I always use this analogy. You can take a pile of Ferrari parts and then just pile them together on the floor, but it doesn't make a Ferrari, right? Same thing with certified parts. They could be certified for a possible, security level, but if they're not put together in the right way, if they're not tested, if they're not maintained, you're not achieving that security level that the parts are certified for. And so that's always something I like to bring up to people to keep that into consideration.
Excellent. Yeah, security is everybody's responsibility. But let's talk a little bit about the intersection of security and privacy, and what are some of the concerns that we have around privacy with smart cities?
A lot of information out there with the smart city, right? So it's always picking up information, and a lot of that information could be used in a way that would be considered potentially a violation of an individual's privacy. Again, going back to NIST, they've done a lot of work around privacy, and there's a lot of information out there that people can leverage when designing these systems to keep privacy in mind. I've got a good friend here at MITRE. She is our preeminent privacy person. Her name is Julie Snyder, and I always go to her with these privacy questions. But NIST has a privacy framework, much like the cybersecurity framework, that it can also be leveraged. It gives you at least a good starting point to kind of explore privacy. And the thing about privacy is that if you don't consider privacy and it becomes an issue, it could very well cause your system, no matter how well designed, if it's a privacy issue, the public will have it shut down. And so it's important to consider privacy earlier on, and so make that consideration.
Yeah, no, I think what the challenge that we're facing is essentially this evolution of technology, right? We saw it from mainframe to PC, then we've gone to cloud, and then now as miniaturization, high storage and memory capabilities are really being brought to the sensor level. So the challenge is almost, again, like when you talk about building in security, it's building in privacy, right? Understanding the data life cycle of these systems, right? What data are you capturing? And answering the question, is it necessary, right? Because oftentimes engineers love to create things and say, well, we'll collect this information, that information, and this and that, the other. But is it really necessary? You know, how many times we look at our phone now and we look at an app that tells us, oh, they are collecting, they want to collect your either your GPS information from your phone, and or if they want to collect other information. And you ask yourself, well, why? You know, there's really no need for them to have that information. And so this is the kind of questions that we're going to have to ask from a city and municipality perspective to really understand and have those hard questions for these system providers, and say, okay, what are you collecting as far as information? Where is it stored? You know, and how long are you keeping it? Because it's incredibly important, because it's not just, okay, you know, they might be collecting information that is necessary and appropriate for the systems that they have, but are they keeping it too long, right? I mean, do they really need to keep it beyond a certain period of time? So all these questions that we talk about privacy on the enterprise side, we need to do that from a smart city system, because those are the things, it's probably the one piece of a smart city system that probably would, you know, security has almost become, all right, that's an easy, you know, conversation to have. But when you start saying privacy, often people are like, well, privacy, you know, like my trash can. But, you know, we talk about also information from a privacy perspective that not only by itself, but now we have to ask the question in aggregate. You're right. I mean, now you are a citizen of this particular town or municipality. And so how much information is being collected at these different, like individually might say, oh, this sensor, well, that's fine because that system does X, Y, and Z, and they need that information. And then the other system itself needs this other piece of information about your personal behaviors and habits and so forth. That's normal, because that's one of these things, is a trade-off, as we mentioned. Now we have to look at, well, in aggregate, is this data being put into a data lake? How is it being analyzed? Can it be possibly a target, right? For not accidental exposure, which is the problem with privacy, but then from a security perspective, can it be targeted, right, for malicious use?
I'm seeing like a stool of the three-legged stool of safety, security, and privacy here, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're blended. They're so sometimes they're so close, or like one cannot without the other, kind of. Yeah, so I only want to add a small thing. Like they have been already like proves that some of these smart devices, especially in the home settings, like a TV, toys for children, collected data and monitor without the user to know about that. So definitely when we think more in the bigger scale, the user needs to be aware, like when the data is collected, what kind of data is collected, where the data goes, and how it's used, and the user to have some kind of input if they want that. So maybe when you sit with your family and relax and you're living, you don't want the Roku or Amazon TV to monitor you or to collect the data of what conversations you are having. So yeah, so the aspect that the user needs to be informed when the data is collected, and there have been multiple studies about Google and Alexa, if they listen us all the time and what kind of data they collect. In many cases where they just got activated, although the user didn't activate them because of the sensitivity of the voice and some words that the user used, which are similar to the keyword for activating the device. So maybe this is more of the aspect of the user and their rights and input. The data is important to improve the cities, but the level of transparency or having the input of the user and maybe integrating the user to be part of that, like to contribute in the way that they can improve the cities in the way they think maybe collectively will be better for everyone, could be helpful.
Yeah, I think it came up in our conversations before previously, and I think, are we going to get to the point which I always, and it's good that this is being recorded, so if I predict it, it comes through. But the fact, I think ultimately, this might end up trying to create a change in the way we look at data and who has that data and who's selling that data, right? When it comes to, really changing that model. And I think, we might get to, like Olivera said, is like, there is this, especially with blockchain technology, there is a better way to be able to track and create non-repudiation around data. And once you do that, then it creates a possible opportunity to have individuals have ownership of their data, true ownership of the data, and being able to then sell that data and or obtain something of value for that data. So I think maybe these, data brokers and these larger tech companies that actually are selling and the data themselves and making a profit, maybe this whole smart city aspect to it might raise the level of privacy of being, okay, do you really need to have somebody else? You should have better control and maybe even create some value behind it.
A question from the audience. Privacy aside, if a dangerous scenario, gas leak, dangerously high temperature levels, possible fire, should safety services be activated automatically? What is your guys' opinion on that?
Safety systems be operate. I could talk about that. So I could talk about it from the perspective of functional safety engineering. I'm a certified functional safety engineer. And so I design systems that do take automatic action. They're very specialized systems, and they're designed with IEC 61511, ISA 84 specifically. There's a lot of regulation that goes around these systems automatically initiating. And those situations are generally covered by OSHA. OSHA 1910 Part 119 talks about process safety management, right? So there's usually a risk analysis performed. The risk analysis will determine whether or not that system needs to automatically initiate, basically. So, you can't just throw out a system or throw out a scenario and then expect to know whether or not it's going to be an automatic thing. There's likelihood and consequence that have to be considered. How often will it happen? What's the probability of it happening? And what's the impact? What's the ultimate consequence? What will happen when it happens? You take all these into considerations, and then you can determine whether or not the system needs to either be manually or automatically operated. In addition to that, with that comes a lot of regulation around how robust, how resilient that system needs to be. There's a thing we call it probability of failure on demand. You have to build that system in accordance with that probability of demand to make sure that it actuates when it does, to make sure that that bad day doesn't happen. So, I mean, it's possible that there will be systems out there that could necessitate that kind of automatic action, but as any good engineer, it depends.
I was going to say, yeah, that's usually the legal answer, right? The lawyers love that. It all depends. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think there's some systems that you do want to have some validation happen, whether it's a secondary system that then automates a validation function associated with the initial alert. Let's say, let's make it simple, the fire alarm or something like that. Fire alarms going off doesn't necessarily mean that you should automatically call the fire department, right? So a lot of hotels, what they do, part of their process is they'll send security just to make sure and double check to see if there is a fire actually before it's taking place. And so that's a pretty important piece, right? You think, well, all of this should be automated. And that goes to show you that having some level of alternate system to be able to check that or validate that initial alert, because you can almost imagine, at least for me, my past life, I was an EMT as well, but you can really think about these automated systems create great opportunities for malicious actors, right? If they know that the systems will automatically fire, in one direction or not, fail safe or fail otherwise, they are able to then manipulate that, so yeah, depends is probably the best answer that might give, really.
kind of a follow-up to that, how involved is law enforcement in the security of smart cities in your experience?
I mean, we do a lot with federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies across the country, and they're very interested. It's amazing how much difference there is between the different organizations. It goes back to privacy, as a matter of fact. We were talking about this once before. It's interesting, wherever you go, there's a different, the community has a different sense of how much privacy they want. Some areas are a little bit more loosey-goosey with the whole idea of privacy. Some are a little bit more regimented and locked down. And so that impacts law enforcement's interaction with smart city technology. But law enforcement, from my experience, is very interested in it. So it's going to be a pretty substantial part of increasing public safety. So that's how we look at it. One of the big things that comes with smart cities is that increase in public safety. So there's a lot of things that go into that law enforcement can take advantage of.
No, I'll echo that. I mean, law enforcement from a municipality perspective and/or federal agencies are very interested. Obviously, from first and foremost, from a life and safety perspective, right? So anything where smart city systems can improve their emergency services and delivery. And then also, very important, they're really concerned about these emergency services being impacted, right, by an attack and or disruption or otherwise. But also, yes, and it's a little controversial, but a lot of these smart city systems and any automation systems, you look at, from an investigations perspective, right? London is possibly the most CCTV cameras in the world are in London, right? And so, and you can argue either way, right? From a society and from a citizenry perspective, whether that is, enough or not enough, and so forth. But obviously, those provides capabilities for law enforcement. They're oftentimes are able to save lives, right? Because they're able to then, be it a camera system or other type of system, they're able to then quickly be alerted by some criminal activity and be able to respond faster. So they're very interested when it comes to the smart cities. Now they do rely on partner organizations and system integrators to really explain some of the whys, right? I mean, because depending on, they have their function and mission, and oftentimes it's very focused. And, it's up to, systems providers and integrators and partners, i.e. like such as MITRE and so forth, to be able to educate, where these systems, how these systems operate and how they can benefit those cities.
What are some backup measures when security and privacy systems go down? They don't operate as desired. We always have to ask that in security. What happens if the security controls do not operate as intended, and privacy controls in this case?
You got to think about that on the front end. I mean, that's something that should be factored in during design engineering, right? So what happens when it fails? I mean, that's always a consideration. Does the system stop? Does it fail to last place? I mean, there's a whole host of considerations. What's the impact of that system failing or turning off, right? So say you lose that capability. Should that system then no longer operate, or does that create a secondary hazard, right? There's a lot of things that need to be considered into that question. But like when it fails, I hope you considered that when you built the system.
Yeah, no, I think, when it comes to any system security, be it for the physical side, cyber, and then obviously, what we're talking about today from a smart city perspective. I mean, resiliency is key, right? So the idea to have redundant systems is critical, right? So we always talk about security and concentric rings, right? In other words, that if some malicious actor is able to bypass the outer ring, then there's a middle ring, and then there's an inner ring of security and tools. And so architecting these systems, exactly like Michael said, developing that resiliency is, you hope it's baked in. And so depending on the scenario, the thing that we're doing now in cybersecurity that it will and spill over because it's something that Michael has did on the OT side of the house is that you have tabletop exercises, you have opportunities to sort of stress test and pen test these systems. So just like organizations will want to be able to red team their applications and systems, same thing in municipalities will want to be able to do the same thing when it comes to these systems. Okay, now this goes down, and it's one of those key injects to any type of cyber or physical exercise. This goes down. What do you do now as a decision leader, incident commands, manager? What do you go next? And oftentimes, I mean, the answer, to be perfectly honest, is you go old school, you go analog, you go paper and pencil, you go, if it's the cell towers are down, you're going to, landlines and from a communication perspectives and this and that and the other. So there's all of these types of strategy development and system deployment and architecture goes into it. Now, I would say that it's not automatic. It is the municipalities have to be able to bake it in as they deploy these systems. And the challenges for smart city and rather municipalities across the globe is that they're not thinking like that. They'll get possibly some grant money and or some funding, and for one specific system, right? They want to improve their sanitation department. They want to put sensors on their garbage cans or this or that or the other. So they're really laser focused on that one system. And they unfortunately can get myopic when it comes to the security aspect of that one system. So it's a challenge. Don't get me wrong, it's not an automatic, but if done right, like Michael said, these systems can be designed in such a way that you have options, right? And when a system goes down, you have backup systems.
Yeah, I didn't mean to sound dismissive either when I was saying that.
No, you didn't.
But you hit on something really important. The whole concept of we call it defense in depth, and I think everybody's calling it that now, right? So when you're designing these systems from a security perspective, you got to have that layers of defense, layers of protection is what we call it in functional safety engineering, but the concept is still defense in depth, having those multiple layers of security that you have to go through to be able to shut it down. And then from a hardware failure perspective, you hit on that again too, having that high availability or redundant system or doing the engineering up front to understand where your single points of failures are and eliminating them. I mean, all this is good resiliency engineering practices. So I think that if you take that into consideration, one last thing that I would add is that, and you hit on this as well, the response. You got to have, a lot of people don't consider the response plan. We always want to do identify, detect, and protect, right? But the response plan or recovery plan, that's not as sexy to a lot of people, but it's very important nevertheless. It's something that absolutely has to be considered because when you're in that spot, you're going to wish you had it, right? So, I mean, having it up front, that's also very important.
Yeah, business continuity and disaster recovery important for anything when we talk about security for sure. What do we see as the future of smart cities, and what do we see the challenges coming ahead for smart city security specifically?
You know, I think about this a lot because this is part of my job. And interesting because, you know, when you look across the country, everybody's smart city is going to be a little bit different, right? They have different focuses. When you look at Boston and compare it to like Oregon, vastly different perspectives on what they're looking to improve on. While I say that, there's like a saying that I always hear, the same but different, right? While they will have different flavors, there will always be likely some core and smart cities technologies that are there. I'm seeing a lot of people adopting smart light poles. Like I said earlier, electric vehicle infrastructure, that's going to be a big part of it too. You know, there's a whole host of these smart cities technologies that are going to be found in pretty much all the smart cities. But like I said, each smart city will most likely have its own flavor based on where it's at and what their populace wants, right? So, I mean, any good smart city will be reflective of the needs of their people in that area.
I think, from the direction where it's heading, you see, I mentioned blockchain, right? So how do you leverage technology that can be extremely beneficial in smart city systems, right? Because, from a blockchain perspective, incredibly important where you have this trusted, method and decentralized method of maintaining, trust in the system, right? So, because I think as these systems grow and scale, that's where ultimately you need to have trust, right? Because then you can have the best system in the world. We talk about autonomous vehicles as one example, right? It's not just the vehicle itself; it is the network of sensors that are across the road that are actually, informing and feeding data into these models that go back into the vehicle and improve the vehicle's performance, from an autonomous perspective. And so you look at the way, it's moving, getting back to there's cloud is here to stay as that control plane. And then you're looking at analytics, right? And so how can you, from not only from analytics, but the automation, because of the scaling of thousands of sensors that can be, dispersed throughout a city, and throughout each system, right? And so I think the two areas that we need to really look at is from a cloud perspective, the machine learning and AI, and I think blockchain. I think one of the areas that I think will benefit, and integrate well with smart cities, system development and deployments. But I really think from a security perspective, all the above at the same time, right? So when we talk about the blockchain perspective, non-repudiation, there was this false narrative that was going around in the beginning with, say, Bitcoin, when the idea that it was this anonymous payment system, and it's not, right? There was a pseudo anonymity to it, but ultimately there is a wallet to a person, right, and or a group or whatever. But that type of connection through and making those connections through investigations from a Bitcoin perspective is the same thing when we're talking about, on the smart city side. There is this notion that you can now, if you have this non-repudiation system that's set up around the sensors and the data that's traversing through these systems, now from a law enforcement security perspective, now we can better track, right? Where is this data coming from? If somebody's trying to poison a data lake, so to speak, with malicious information and or corrupt some sensors, having this ability, and perfect examples, the Michigan proof of concept. If these sensors that are being manipulated on a vehicle, and if you're using blockchain to be able to then create this non-repudiation of those sensors, now if they start manipulating, you can actually quickly, from an anomalous behavior perspective, say, okay, that's not a real sensor, right? It's a bogus sensor. Each sensor has its own, blockchain or its own key, right? So these are the things that I think when we talk about where we're going, I think really that's the area that I think, at least I'm thinking about.
Excellent. Olivera,
all right, go ahead. No, Olivera, please.
Yeah, definitely. Something related with the AI that it mentioned, AI and trust. Now there's a lot of research in at Ordinal and other national labs and universities, as I know, working on the interpretability and explainability of AI machine learning models, so we can understand better why they're making the decisions that they make and what were the influential factor. And I think the advance in that and having that metric of knowing how and why the algorithm is making the decision, and having that metric of trust will help the future, having that trust in the future smart cities and the system deployed in the cities.
Excellent. Now, I think we're coming up on time. I know that we might have room for one more question. Should the government develop security standards and regulations for smart cities? And what should be the priority security controls that should be in place?
Michael, you want to go first and I'll go?
What was that one again? What did the bill?
They are asking what we should focus on. What is the priority security control that should be in place? And should the government develop security standards and regulations for smart cities?
That's always a tough one. So being somebody that came from the industry doesn't typically enjoy regulations, overabundance of regulations. It often slows down development. But the reality of it is that some things need to be regulated. And so with that said, I think there's a lot of stuff out there that we can do before we need to regulate. I mean, there's a lot that can be done using the cybersecurity framework and other standards to get things going in the right way. I say that, and I hope that people do this because it's what you're supposed to do, it's what's right? But the reality of it is, chances are, it'll probably take some kind of regulation. And with that, I imagine that something based off of either NIST cybersecurity framework or even NIST 882 will be, though these things are very much non-regulatory, it would be the basis of something that could potentially be pushed forward. And I just want to stress that it's non-regulatory right now.
No, I think absolutely. I mean, regulation in and of itself is not necessarily, it's usually the lagging, I wouldn't say lagging indicator per se, but it's usually when it gets to the regulation perspective, when it usually lags the technology and the speed of technology, right? So it's tough to have regulations that are not really based on sound frameworks, and so it has to be based on, like what we were mentioning, NIST cybersecurity frameworks, and at a higher level, our organizations, for example, the federal government, through executive order to the previous president, basically mandated federal government agencies. We were already recommending it from the government perspective that critical infrastructure should adopt the CSF.
Mhm.
But it should have been sort of backwards. The federal government should have already adopted CSF and then told critical infrastructure that they should adopt the framework. But these are the areas when we look at standards, I think standards is key. And the challenge with smart cities is we definitely do not have the standards like we do on the enterprise side of the house. We do from an engineering and IEEE and this and that and the other, and from a life and safety situations, but standards are around securing and best practices and so forth like that. NIST is working hard, and they've put out guidance here recently for smart cities and so forth. And so I think regulatory, this is where I'll contradict myself. Organizations, unfortunately, there's two areas where they deploy or improve their security posture, right? It's usually due to compliance, that they have to comply with some regulatory framework, and two, that they've been the victim, right? This is post-victim where they say, okay, I should be spending more money or paying more attention on security. So the answer again goes back to it depends, but I think ultimately it has to be tied to standards, and the way the framework was done, and this cybersecurity framework was nice because it incorporated multiple standards, multiple global standards, and then also invited private industry, right, to comment, to add, and to be a part of that development of that framework. And similar with smart cities, this is exactly what we need to do. We have to have this open-ended framework development that occurs, but then regulation come in at a certain point, but I don't think it's the regulation should be the first one to the table.
Excellent. Well, that is all the time we have today, but thank you everybody for attending. Thank you panelists for your expertise, and we really appreciate you joining today for this important day this important event organized by IoT. And with that, I will turn it back to your host, Lucian. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks you, Anka. Thank you, Michael, Oliveira, and Ed. What a day. I appreciate everybody's input. I appreciate you folks sticking around. And just an FYI, the next event is on March 22nd, which is leveraging items like drones to inspect transformers. We have an energy day coming up in June, and also manufacturing for those of you that are interested. You'll get an email with the recordings, so you can watch on demand. So everybody that's registered will get those. And with that, this concludes the program for today. Those of you that have been active in the Q&A, you'll receive an invite to our VIP community, as well as the speakers, of course, so you can interact there, continue the conversation. Hopefully we just scratched the surface and you have more engagements, and appreciate you being with us. This concludes the program for today.